Hello YouTube. Jay-Z had a song, I got the keys, I got the keys, how we slaves in 2016. So in the video, if you're familiar with it, it's with DJ Khaled, Fabulous, Future, with a bunch of rappers, different artists, and they're in a jail cell. And that particular lyric just stuck out to me, like how we slaves in 2016. And the topic for today, I'll be talking about Rikers Island, the history of, I'll be talking about Louima and Amadou Diallo. I picked those two people out because they were two men that were harassed and brutalized by police. Louima survived it. To my knowledge, he's like the only one that survived police brutality. I'll get into what happened to him. He was a Haitian American. Amadou Diallo was African immigrant from Guinea. And I'll be talking about the history of the police department and how it all started and what I learned in school and the foster care system. So basically, Rikers Island is in New York City, and those of you who live in New York City is a very old city, and there's a lot of history to it. And basically, there was a man by the name of Mr. Riker who was a judge. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with 12 Years a Slave, but basically the movie is not, that guy that's in that movie, it didn't just happen to him. So Mr. Riker, Abraham Riker, he was responsible for putting people back into slavery. So basically, before there was Rikers Island, there was, if you crossed a certain area in New York, they would make you a slave all over again. So I could only imagine what that was like for people to be a free slave and then you got to be put back into slavery. I can't stress enough that when you get arrested and put to jail, you are not just property of the state. You become a slave. They'll give you a job, you have a bed and 3 meals, but you'll get paid like $3 an hour, if that much. You have to do labor. You just not just stay at home and do nothing like you did with your mama. When you go to jail, you have chores to do. You have to do work. So it's kind of a good and a bad thing. For some people, they go back to school and they better themselves. And then in other cases, they don't allow them to have updated books. So it really depends on the prison that you go to and the sentence you have. If you're only in jail for 2 years, of course, you're not going to be able to get your degree. But some people that have went to jail for long periods of time, they have accomplished that. So it really depends. Rikers Island is predominantly African American and Latino inmates that are in there. Most of them are in there. They come from poverty. Most of the people that are African American, once in a while you'll have somebody that comes from money that's in and out of jail. But for the most part, if you pay attention, people who are in and out of jail come from poverty, often come from poor families. And that's not a coincidence. As my time as an assistant teacher, what I've seen in the years that I've been an assistant teacher, there is something called a school to prison pipeline, unfortunately. And so you have the predominant, first of all, I work with special needs children, and most of the people that are special needs are black boys. Most of the people that's in prison are black young men. Statistics show otherwise, and also when I was in college, and that's what I wanted to talk about also. So my professor showed us on Google that there are more white people in jail than blacks. But overall, as far as when you compare our race to, let's say, Asians or Indians, there are a heavy amount of African Americans in jail. You can't deny that. So that's not like by accident, right? That's kind of like a setup, I believe. And it starts from school. So recently I worked in a school in my neighborhood before I came to the school I'm at now, and there literally was a little black boy, 3 years old, and he was able to write his name, articulate, read, and do everything. Both myself and the therapist agreed that he does not need to be in that room. There were children in the room who were not potty trained. There were children in the room who could not talk. So even if you never worked with kids, you could see that he's a very bright boy. He doesn't belong there. Oftentimes you have teachers, black principals, but for whatever odd reason, that will put a child such as himself in a special ed class. And what begins to happen is they begin to act like those students. Often our black boys are put into special ed because of behavioral problems that could easily be rectified if given an easy discipline, or you take their candy away, or something simple. But you have to understand that some people literally, they don't care about black children. So to make their job easier is to just write them off and put them in special ed, right? So what happens is they get put in special ed. Often the parents, they're not knowledgeable or educated enough to speak up, because that's another thing I wanted to let my parents know, if I haven't said this. If you have a child in special ed, or if they telling you you have to have an individualized education plan, it is your due diligence as a parent to go to those meetings and to advocate for your child. Your child does not have to be in special ed. You could speak up for your child and say, no, I don't agree with this, and this is not what's going to happen. Now, in some cases, yes, does special ed work if you put them in the right school, in the right district. If you, and I'm going to just put it out there, a neighborhood like Brownsville, if your child does not go to charter school, they're not going to succeed, and that's just the facts. There are people who went to public schools in Brownsville, and it took them for them to drop out of high school to get their life together. You don't want that. You want your child to keep going and moving forward in life, right? And if they choose to drop out of college, it won't be because of academic issues, because they can't read or something like that. So with parents, you have to do your research. You can't just say, well, I live here, and this is not just for Brownsville, this is for any area that you don't live in the best area. It is your due diligence to do the research and try to find a good school in the area, right? Which is very hard, yeah, so if a child is not properly educated, 9 times out of 10 they're gonna act out, right? And so when they act out, instead of trying to find an alternative way to deal with them, they put them in special ed. Even with Hispanic children as well. When I worked in the Midwood High School, a boy told me how he was put into special ed because he threw a chair at somebody. This is one incident now. One incident. Kids kept bothering him. He finally threw a chair at somebody and they put him in special ed. That doesn't make any sense, right? But this is what they do to children of color that don't fit into the box, and they don't try to figure out what's wrong with them. They just X them out and put them in special ed. So you as a parent, you have to advocate for I can't stress that enough. You have to advocate and speak up for your child. You have to. The history of the police department. So I learned in my class, very interesting, policing class, the history of the police department. They were nothing more than slave catchers. That's right, you heard it. They were slave catchers, right? So what was a slave catcher? If you were a slave and you ran away, they would send the police to catch you, to put you back in slavery. What do police officers do now? Exactly. So when people ask me, well, why you don't want to be a police officer? The history, and I am so happy that I went to Mercy College and I was properly educated, because there's a lot of people who don't know that. You know, and for me, the history of something is everything. I don't care what you say. If it don't have a good foundation or history, I'm not with it. You know, to all the black officers, more power to you. I don't understand why a person would want to do that as a person of color. I understand you got to feed your family, but it's not for me. It's not for me. And the interesting thing about police brutality, when we talk about George Floyd, when we talk about Sean Bell, there was a black officer that was participating in the tomfoolery. If you watch the Harriet movie with Cynthia, you see that the black man, he kills the girl for not telling him where Harriet is. You know, so it you know, slave catchers are not just the white police officer, is the black police officer from way back when. It's nothing new. You know, I think I made mention that we sold each other into slavery, because me as a little girl, right, Africa is huge, and not to stereotype, but black men are very strong, right? It's not just the way they look, just literally they're very strong, very strong. So you telling me an African man was overpowered by a white man? I never believed that. Even as a little girl, it didn't make sense to me. And as I got older and I read books and watched movies and watched Roots, I said, yeah, that makes sense, that we sold each other out. There's no way that a couple of hundred white guys is going to come to a continent and just take over. You know, so you can't, when we talking about the police department and things that they do is wrong, is we have to look at these black officers. What is their problem? You know, why do you hate your own race? You know, what's really going on? You know, but I think I'm gonna save that topic for tomorrow, when I talk about, are they trying to make the black race extinct? And that's gonna be my last topic for the Black History series. So yeah, that's the history of the department, of the police department. The police department came out in around the early 1800s. Back then you didn't need a test. They felt like a lot of officers were foolish, and so as the years went on, they had to take a test. And as the years went on after that, they had to take, now you need 60 credits to be a police officer, which is fine, you know. Yeah. So yes, the original, you know, why did we come up with the police department? The original goal was for slave catching. That was it. That was their goal. You were a slave and you ran away, the police officer would go and catch you, bring you back to slavery. And then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and crime became so big, they like, you know what, let's just keep doing this. And it was a department that worked, you know. So yeah. So foster care system, as I originally talked about, I chose to talk about the foster care system because so many people that I've met that are black are from foster care. When I did the research, it said that there are more white kids in foster care, but I know enough black people that went through foster care, so I wanted to talk about that. Foster care is something that was replaced from orphanages. So before you had orphanages, and then they turned to a foster care system. They have something called CPS, and then they have ACS. So foster care is a child who does not have a family or parents, and then they hand them over to foster care. Black children make up 23% of all children in foster care, compared to 14%. Some children are in foster care because of lies. I don't know why somebody would call CPS on somebody. You know, if you feel like a child is in danger of their life, that's understandable, but you have people that just call CPS on somebody just because. Thank God nobody's ever called CPS on me, but I do feel empathy for parents who have gone through that. I had a family member who went through that, and we don't know who called it on her. She had to fight for her son, and it took some weeks for her to get her kid back. Very scary time, and it's very evil, I feel like, to do that to somebody, you know. Yeah, so November 22nd of 2023, a mother sued for false allegations. So that's what happens oftentimes. Allegations, somebody could call anonymously on you, and depending on the social worker, depending on their mood and their opinion, they will remove the child from the home. It's happened time and time again. Sometimes it's not really a good decision, and some children end up dying in these foster homes, you know, unfortunately. You know, that's a job that I would never want. I would never want to be in charge of, because that's somebody's life. You could be messing up somebody's life by leaving them there or removing them. You just never know. California is number 1 in foster care, while New York is number 6. And as far as the jail system, they say it's 48% white and 30% are black. And often a lot of foster care children, they do end up in jail. Not all, but there's a big percentage of them that do end up in jail, unfortunately, because when you don't know where you come from, and this is not a cliche, but when you don't know who you are and you're separated from your family, what does that sound like? Slavery, right? Frederick Douglass, like I mentioned, was separated from his mom. Just like foster care. Fast forward to foster care. Black children being separated from their parents. When you don't know where you come from, you don't know your family, you start to act out. So I can imagine a child being in a home, having structure, having love, being removed from the home. You gotta go to school. You're gonna start to act out. You're human as a kid, right? So that child starts to act out, and then the teacher that doesn't have emotional intelligence, they just, put them in special ed. They get to special ed, and then that pushes them further back in their education. So what happens? They drop out and commit crimes and end up in jail. It's literally a system. It is. Most of the people that's in jail, especially back and forth, some of them do come from 2-parent households. Some of them do. But a vast majority don't. And this is why I call it the school to prison pipeline. And it's a revolving cycle for a lot. There's something called Prison Song. I encourage everybody needs to see it as a black person. Even if you're white, it's good to see it too. But it's a movie with Mary J. Blige and Q-Tip. And it's about a couple, you know, he's doing his pictures or whatever, they're engaged, she's going to school, she's working, the little boy, he's going to school. Like, it's a very positive family. And then in a blink of an eye, the father gets arrested for like not listening to the police officer. The mother, what happens is the little boy, he flickers a red light in the police officer's face, so they put him in juvie. The mother coming from work, she's very tired. She's like, yo, let me just pick up my son and go home, right? So she tries to take him home, and so they put her in a psych ward because they like, oh, she was acting crazy, right? So the father is in jail. She ends up in a psych ward, and where does he go? He ends up in foster care, right? So after foster care, he ends up in a group home, and he grows up. He becomes a young man. He actually has a scholarship to go to college, but what happens is Fat Joe is jealous of him, which it happens in a lot of foster care homes. So he's like, oh, you think you all of that and this, that, and the third, and blah, blah, whatever, right? So Fat Joe pushes him, and so Q-Tip pushes him on the train tracks. What happens after that? Q-Tip loses his scholarship, he loses everything, and he ends up in jail, right with his father. So that's a perfect example of the foster care to prison pipeline, and it happens to a lot of people. The people that I know who've been in foster care, lucky for them, they've never been in jail. One is married, owns a home with his wife. He's doing very well. I'm very proud of him. Another one, he's single, he doesn't have any children, but the people I know from foster care, they're actually doing well. But a lot of people don't do well. And it's a very sad movie, but it's a very real movie. And again, it's called Prison Song. Check it out. Next, I want to talk about Abner Louima. Now, why did I choose to talk about Abner Louima? I wanted to talk about Abner Louima because he was a Haitian American, and to me, it was the most painful story I've ever heard. I've heard of a lot of sad stories, but when this story came out, I was 8 years old. It happened in 1997, and I remember it happened in the summertime, August 9th, but when I came back to school in September, the teachers talked about it like all the time. I remember it was heavy on the news. It was like tension on, because my father is a retired 911 operator. They talked about it heavy on the job. It was just a very racist time. I don't care what anybody says. The 90s was an eye-opener for a lot of people. Like, I think anybody living in New York City in the 90s, it was like, wow, this is how NYPD get down, because NYPD never really was on the news like that, right? You never really heard about NYPD brutalizing people until the 90s. You heard about it in other states, right? But as a New Yorker, you would be like, oh, well, that's a down south issue. But then in the 90s, it started to spiral out of control. Sean Bell happened in 2006. Eric Garner happened in 2012. Or NYPD, right? So I would say, just me being a 35-year-old from born and raised in New York City, it has the most police brutality ever. There's always something going on in New York City with the police department, to the point that we don't call the police. You could just watch the news, and it's not an out-of-state issue, it's an NYPD issue. And it's really sad because just talking about it is emotional for me, because it's amazing that he stayed in America. Now, he was born and raised in Haiti. He came here for a better life, and that happened to him. He went to a club called Club Rendezvous in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and this happened August 29th, or August 29th, 1997. And they put a plunger up his behind, and it was something I would never forget, though I was a child. And that's when I realized that, wow, like, this is real. And some people might feel like, oh, or they probably forgot, and they think, oh, it only happens to Americans. This man was Haitian, right? He came from Haiti. And I chose to talk about Abner Louima specifically because he was not American. So people have this notion that they just attack Americans that just, you know, they have a record, like Floyd had a record. And I actually had an African woman, I stopped patronizing her. She had the audacity to say that we give the police a hard time, that's why they kill us. That really came out her mouth. And she's an African woman. So I didn't really go back and forth with her, because it's like, obviously she is new to the country, and I briefly told her about Abner Louima, and she didn't, I don't know if she believed me, but I said, I have you to know that in 1997, and I always have to educate. In 1997, a Haitian American had a plunger up his behind. He didn't do anything to deserve that. Amadou Diallo was an African and was shot 41 times. Wyclef wrote a song about it. Lauryn Hill wrote a song about it. And when Amadou Diallo got shot, it was just like, damn, again? And unfortunately, he passed away. But back to Louima. So in 2001, $8.7 million he won for his injuries. And he had 3 major operations. And he was in the hospital for 2 months. I thought he was in the hospital much longer because they beat him so badly that the plunger was stuck in his mouth. They beat his mouth. His teeth had came out, and they put the plunger up his behind. They call it sexual. I don't really think it was sexual. I think it was just the hatred that they have for black people. And the hatred, I remember growing up as a kid, a lot of people hated immigrants. I don't know why, but I remember American adults making very racially motivated comments, right? So it wasn't just white people, it was black people too that had this hatred against immigrants. The 90s was just very racist, to say the least. It was very racist. From what I remember as a kid. I remember going to church and people would say things about Africans. I remember going to school and people would say things, and I just couldn't understand it. And I'm like, well, what did they do? Like, why is it that I just couldn't understand it? I still don't get it. Because at the end of the day, you know, they didn't know he was Haitian. They just see black. They don't care, you know. You could be Haitian, African, African American, from Louisiana, New York, whatever. They see this, you black. So I never understood the disconnect between us because we all have the same struggle. The names of the officers were Charles Swartz, Vlop, Bruder, and Wise, and Sergeant Michael Belemo. Justin Vlop was sentenced to 30 years with no parole, but he was released in 2023, I guess for good behavior. Justin kicked Louima in the testicles, and he was the one that put the broomstick up his behind. I remember seeing the video, and there was definitely 2 people doing that. I don't know why Justin was the only one who got the 30 years. Unfortunately, the rest of the officers were acquitted. Nothing happened. Justin went to jail, and he bragged about it to the sergeant. It was a bloody stick. This story is the most emotional for me, because it's like the fact that only one person went to jail and he's out of jail. It's just like, and then the fact that people forgot this story, it's like when I bring it up, people like, they don't remember. Like, how can you forget Abner Louima? I can never forget nothing like this. I'm gonna be 100 years old telling this story, because you can't forget stuff like that. Because what happens is, we as a people are so forgetful and forgiving, and then it keeps happening. You can't forget stuff like this. You can't forget it. You know, you can't forget it. Charles Swartz actually, which he actually helped to hide. He actually committed perjury. He lied on the stand. But right now he works for NYCHA and he's making 6 figures. There's no story of Bruder and Wise or what they're doing, but they were acquitted. They didn't go to jail for anything. My goodness. And that has to be the most upsetting, because to humiliate a man like that and there's no jail time, and only one person went to jail and he's walking the streets, he got out in 2023. Our system is just like, I don't know what to say. But we are making progress. Floyd, that officer, went to jail, so you know, it's a little progress. Now for Amadou Diallo. Also with Abner Louima, he actually went back to Haiti and paid for 14 kids to go to school. And he owns some properties and stuff in Miami. So, you know, he's still living in America, which is also something that I find very remarkable and brave of him. Yeah, that he came to America, and I'm sorry that that happened to him. But he's still living his life, and he's walking around and healthy. That's the main thing. And I thought that that was so amazing that he recovered from that. Because I remember people thought he was gonna die. You know, he lost a lot of blood. He was beaten very badly. And it's like, who does that, right? We never heard of somebody putting up a stick up somebody behind. You know, and for a police officer to do that, brag about it, and now he's walking the streets, it's just like, it's disgusting. I don't know how somebody could work for a department like that. Again, to each their own. But I don't care if I couldn't find a job nowhere. You wouldn't be seeing me work for a department like that. No. That's just, it's sick. It shows what they really think about us. It's how they keep telling you. They keep showing you. You ain't got to show me with one time. You know, but yeah. But, Amadou Diallo. So he was shot February 4th, 1999. He was shot 41 times. Those police officers didn't go to jail at all. They were found not guilty. And I wanted to explain why. It's not just racism, it's the fact that they knew how to lie. And I think I spoke about this, or maybe I didn't speak about this. So when I was in college, I had to do a presentation on Trayvon Martin. And I explained to my classmates why Zimmerman didn't go to jail. And he didn't go to jail because they were able to bring evidence that Trayvon was skipping school. The person that they had come, that was his friend, that was talking and saying things, she could not articulate herself. She couldn't read script. So as far as the jury was concerned, this was a kid who was no good, not educated, and the parents also lied on the stand. When they asked the father, who is that on the tape, he said he didn't know. And the prosecutor's like, you don't know your own son's voice. That was a turnoff for the jury, right? So some people might say, oh, it's racism, whatever, but when it comes down to court, you have to prove things. So with Amadou Diallo, there was a alleged rapist that was going around, and I say alleged because these people knew how to lie. They knew how to tell a story in court. So they said that there was an alleged rapist going around in the Bronx, which I don't understand. What does that have to do with you shooting a gun 41 times? Nobody stopped to think about that. So Amadou Diallo was a student. Amadou Diallo was working, had no children. His mother, who's on a documentary, did not want him to come to America. She had a bad feeling. She's like, no, don't go. He said, Mom, I want to go to school. I want to better myself. She said, okay. They already had a good life in Africa, but he wanted to make a life in America. He came to America. He's in school. He got an apartment. He comes home from work. So what happens is they saw him. I heard two different stories. So the documentary said he was trying to get to his apartment. The research that I have said that the cops said that they saw him loitering, right? Which I think is a lie, because that just doesn't sound like a person that's coming from work. Why would he be loitering in front of the building? But that's what they tell the judge. That's what they told their lawyers. And so that's what made sense. He was in front of the building doing nothing. He was loitering. This is the story that they told. And then so he proceeds to go in his pocket to take out his wallet, and they thought it was a gun. Somehow or another, one of the officers ends up shooting himself. The other three officers come from where they are. They hear the shots. They think that Amadou Diallo shot him, and so they shoot him. And so somehow that made sense to the jury. And that's how they got acquitted, because they were able to come up with a story that at that moment made sense to the jury. Makes no sense to me, but that's what happened. The family actually won $61 million. They sued and they won. But the fact that those officers, not one of them went to jail, it's just like, what? You know, it's just sad. So yeah, those were the two, yeah, that I picked those two because I felt like those were the most, those were the worst, I felt like. So you heard my Rikers Island story. Rikers Island today has an exceptional amount of minorities. It's disgusting how many black people is in Rikers Island. How they treat the inmates. They have a bunch of videos on YouTube. I could be here all night to tell you about that. It's very disgusting how they treat people. You have COs that have stories. They literally kill people in Rikers Island for no reason. Sometimes they put rat poisoning in the food, all type of craziness I've heard. And the funny thing is, I actually went on an interview to work there and they never called me back. And you know what? All things happen for a reason. It wasn't meant for me to work at Rikers Island. It wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be. Because the history is so disgusting. And forget the history. What they do to our people right now in Rikers Island. I also wanted to put this out there. If you don't have the bail, you go to jail. It's not just a cliche, it's real. So let's say you get arrested for indecent exposure. Do you not know that if you cannot pay that bill, they give you a certain time? So if you can't pay it, they send you to Rikers Island. They send you to Rikers Island. And you could be there for up to a year because of a $500 fine that you can't afford. What does that sound like? Slavery, right? And yeah, so everything that I've talked about hopefully makes you stop and think. People may disagree with me when it comes to the police department, but the history is there, the research is there. Don't argue with me, argue with your mother. And those are my thoughts.